Hello, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are now. Um, Welcome to our attendees. My name is Jasser. I am the translator and the membership coordinator for Form. And today we are having our seventh activity for 2025. It's making space on the shelves, open access books in open science. I will be taking it step by step because I know that people are coming within the next few minutes, so I might be repeating things over and over. And I see people are still coming until now. Um, okay, before we start today, we will just have some housekeeping rules that we would be delighted to go through together in order to make sure that our session today will be easy for all of us. So for the housekeeping rules, there are some rules for Zoom. I know that everyone here knows about Zoom and what are the features, but it's good to have some sort of a recap. So the first feature is the movable windows. So you don't have to stay with us the whole hour or the whole duration of the event today. You can just drag the window and put it aside. Maybe you can send emails, you can communicate, or you can follow up with your work. The second feature is the raise the hand. We normally use this feature when we notice that one of our speakers is speaking too fast or something, or you would like to raise a concern about something. So just use this feature. And the chat, please, you can use the chat to let us know where you're from and who are you and from which part of the world you're attending with us today. We can chat about the session, we can chat about the topic. However, there are the fourth feature, which is the Q&A box. This is highly advised to be used for content-related questions. So please, if you have any questions, please do not put them in the chat box, or else they might be lost within the chats and all the everything from all the attendees today. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we will make sure to pass it to our speakers and we may get back to it by the end of today's session. Next slide, please, Mira. So before we start, we would like just to give you a very basic idea about Forum, the Forum for Open Research in MENA. It's a non-profit membership organization supporting the advancement of open science policies and practices in research communities and in institutions across the Arab region, the 22 countries. And we support the advancements of open science ecosystems and higher educational institution across the Arab world, and we create accessible and localized resources relating to the implementation of open science policies and practices. We encourage collaborative community partnerships and cooperation between members and partners of Forum, and we champion the development of right-to-left functionality in key open source and open science technological solutions. Next slide, please, Mira. So our vision is to unlock research for and in the Arab region and working towards a more open world. And our mission is to support the advancement of open science practices in research communities and research institutions across the Arab region. This is by facilitating the exchange of actionable insights and the development of practical policies. Next slide, please, Mira. And we have a very wide network, which includes researchers, librarians, professors, policymakers, university leaders, and open science advocates. Until today, we have around 19 members and partners. We have worked with 5,300 individuals from more than 200 institutions across 100 countries in the world. Next slide, please, Mira. And our capacity building consists of localized resource library and Diamond Open Access journal. For the localized resource library, we started actually working this year on providing a resource library which provides different topics of open access or open science. You may find it in our website. And we have our Diamond Open Access Journal Al-Wusul. And the third pillar is the community development activities, which is like the one we are attending today, and the regional research projects. Next slide, please, Mira. And the community building, it consists of regional discussion forum, regional open science newsletter, and stakeholders priorities framework. Next slide, please, Mira. So for connection and representation, we are seeking to connect local stakeholders with global organizations, and we support collaborative multilateral dialogues, participation in global working groups, providing Arabic translation for global organizations, and signing declarations and joining aligned organizations. So without further ado, I know that you're not here to listen to me. We are here to listen to our speakers today, Kevin Sanders from Open Book Collective and Kara Hopkins from Opening the Future. They will be with us today. And without further ado, I will leave you to have your session with them. So the mic is yours now. Thank you so much.
Yep. Right, good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us. We're just going to briefly introduce ourselves before we start with the topic. So I am Dr. Kira Hopkins. I work at Opening the Future, which is part of the COPEN project, which we're going to talk about today. We fund Diamond Open Access for books, which is something else that we'll be talking about. Before that, I was an open access publisher in London, and before that, I did a PhD on archaeology.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here today. I'm Kevin Sanders. I work for Open Book Collective, which I'll be going through at greater length in the presentation. Before joining Open Book Collective, I was a librarian for many years at around 8 universities across the UK, focusing particularly on open access and scholarly communications. And I also co-founded and operated a Diamond Open Access journal. So I have extensive experience thinking around Diamond Open Access and instituting that for universities in the UK. So yeah, with our introductions over, I suppose we'll move on.
So to turn first to the title we have today about making space on the shelves, we're pointing here to the fact that discussions about open access generally focus on journals, but we want to talk about books as well because they're an important part of open access. By extension, arts, humanities, and social sciences are also important in open access. There's a link there because arts and social sciences are more closely associated with books than they are with journals. So to turn to sort of the big question first, why should we talk about this? Why does open access matter for books? There are many benefits to open access. Some of them are general to all formats and some of them more relevant to books. To take the book-specific ones first, into what I just mentioned, that books are much more likely to be arts, humanities, and social sciences publications. However, this is not a fast rule, and it is important to remember. I think the most recent I heard is that 30% of monographs are STEM subjects, arts, humanities, and social sciences. So it's not a hard divide of books are for arts and journals are for STEM. It's just a general trend. So books are much more likely to be helping artists and social science researchers make their work more available. It's particularly important for them to be able to make monographs available because this is still one of the most important outputs for their career progression. It's also where ideas are most intensely developed by researchers. The monograph is often seen as part of the research process itself, so it's important that this data is also available more widely. But to turn to more general points, open access obviously allows more access to works. If we look at the top left here, I have a screenshot from UCL Press's analytics dashboard. UCL Press is an open access press which was refounded about 10 years ago. As you can see from the figures at the top left here, they reached very recently a massive milestone of 20 million accesses to their titles, bearing in mind that the bulk of their work is in books rather than journals. This is a huge number, obviously. There's also clear and measurable proof that open access in books as well as journals accrues more citations. The graph on the right here is quite illuminating. It divides citations over the past 15, well, from 2010 to 2019. It divides them along different parameters such as subject or region. The colored lines, so the green, the red, and the gold, are all different kinds of open access, and the gray is closed access. And as you can see, however you measure it, open access work has more citation than closed access. I'd also like to note that the graph is trending downwards not because people are citing less, but because we're getting closer to the current date, so fewer citations have accrued over time. Meanwhile, the map on the bottom left shows another really important aspect of open access, which is there is a broader geographical spread of engagement. This map is taken from another piece of research on the spread of book views rather than citations. And I've circled the broad region that we're discussing today, but with an ellipse tool, so it's imperfect. So my apologies for what has accidentally been included or not included. But as you can see, the average downloads per open access book are much more numerous than for closed access books. The closed access bit is virtually a sea of white with a couple of exceptions. And if we look at this on a more granular level, we can see this playing out. This is one open access title from an open access publisher. The subject is on oral literature in Africa. And as you can see from the granular access data that this publisher has given on this title, 2/3 of the accesses to this work are from the region that it covers. And you can also see on the per country breakdown on the right that this sort of further highlights that this is what's happening. As this, among many other books would indicate, open access allows regions and communities to more easily access relevant scholarship. And this is simply not the same for expensive closed monographs, particularly in places where library budgets may be considerably lower. So these are the benefits of open access for books, as well as more broadly. We'd now like to turn to a brief history of open access books, which is slightly shorter than the history of open access journals, but not by as much as you might think, because in fact, open access books and open access book publishers have been flying under the radar for quite some time. So if we look here on this slide at the establishment of specialist open access presses, two of the very first were Open Humanities Press and Open Book Publishers, which were both founded in 2009, both of which are still ongoing and very well respected humanities publishers today. This was followed in 2011 by Punctum, which is also still a thriving and well-respected humanities publisher, as well as covering social sciences and art. In the same year, African Minds, which showcases African scholarship, was also founded and continues to flourish. In 2014, Mise Press was founded, and in 2016, Mattering Press was founded. And then finally, all of these presses listed here today formed the Scholar-Led Consortium in 2018. The Scholar-Led Consortium is a group of scholar-led open access publishers who are like-minded and ethically aligned. And this event in 2018 is particularly close to our hearts because the Scholar-Led Consortium was the inception of the COPIM project that we both work on and that Kevin will be talking about shortly. So open access for books has in fact been around for quite a while, and it's also growing quite rapidly and quite steadily. I'd also like to note what I have here on the bottom left of my slide is that in the wake of these more radical scholar-led publishers, more traditional mainstream publishers also realized relatively early that open access for books was going to be quite important. For example, De Gruyter and Springer Nature had early, slightly tentative pilots for open access book publishing in 2010 and 2011, and soon afterwards established open access books as a regular part of their publishing operations. And I believe, although it's quite hard to find out, that Palgrave Macmillan might have been the first of the larger traditional publishers to start regularly publishing open access books from 2013. But to return to the theme of growth, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years, OAPEN, which is a very large online library of open access books that some of you may have used, is extremely helpful in measuring this growth. Because it's very common for publishers to host their open access books on OAPEN. Therefore, OAPEN has a lot of data over time across subject and across language about open access book titles. So, for example, I pulled out all of the open access titles that are in Arabic. This is the graph on the top left. As you can see, it's still a small number, but it is absolutely growing. You can see that there is an upward trend here, indicating that open access books are growing, but also that this growth is not just occurring in English language titles or in titles from or about the UK, US, or Europe. I also pulled out data across different subjects, which is the graph on the right. And I note here that the middle subject is medicine, just to evidence what I said earlier, that in fact, there are many STEM books, and that therefore to discuss open access for books is still to be discussing STEM and open science in its broadest forms. So as we can see here, from 2015 to 2020 to 23, across a humanities, a STEM, and a social science subject, there is quite steady growth in the number of titles being published year on year. And so before we turn to the COPEN project itself, I'd like to briefly talk about another subject which is very close to both our hearts because it's something that we work on every day, which is funding open access books. Because some of you may have been thinking while I'm talking now that this is all very well, it's a lovely idea, it's such a nice notion that books can be open access, but books are very, very expensive. Prohibitively so for most authors and their institutions to pay, if they were to pay a book charge in the same way they often pay a per article charge, that it's simply not possible for them to shell out anywhere between $7,000 and $15,000 or even more $1,000 or pounds. And books are undeniably more expensive than journal articles, and also probably than journals. They have a very different editorial process. The editor is generally much more directly involved in the manuscript, and they are simply longer. Consequently, there are higher production and editorial costs. And we do acknowledge that. We acknowledge that there are greater difficulties there. But in fact, this has led to an extremely rich and interesting funding history, and one that is substantially different for books than it has been for journals. So I'd like first to look at this little chart I have on the right here. And this chart is purely for a UK context, but it's replicated in many other places. What I have here are two different UK mandates for open access. On the top, I have one for UKRI, one of our largest funding bodies, previously called Research Councils UK, hence the different name there at the top. And the other is for REF, the Research Excellence Framework, which is an exercise done by the government every few years to determine how much funding different universities will get. Both of these have open access mandates. UKRI, previously Research Councils UK, brought in an open access journal policy in 2013. REF, meanwhile, brought one in 2016. However, UKRI did not bring in a corresponding book open access policy until 2024, and REF has still to do so. It's on the cards for 2029. You may have seen there was quite a lot of public debate about it earlier this year, but it may not be in 2029. It may be pushed back slightly further. So mandates for open access journals in the UK and generally elsewhere has been earlier than mandates for books on either a funder or a state level. As a result, pots of money were made available for open access journals, governmental, funder, and institutional levels. Other people made pots of money earlier to pay article processing charges. For example, the Gates Foundation, which provided very extensive funding for this for journals only. Coalition S also supported this kind of funding for journal articles. However, both withdrew their support and their money in late 2024 and 2025 after concluding that these were not efficient uses of funds and that they were not the best way to fund open access. And we have a lot to say at COPIM about the equity, the fairness, and even the effectiveness of such funding. But what is important for this discussion about book funding is that this money and these mandates simply did not exist for books in the same way. This is starting to change as open access book mandates are coming in, but the history has been totally different. And for many years, relatively speaking, there was a total vacuum of funding of this kind for open access books. And this vacuum, though, which might sound disastrous, it has in fact led to a flourishing of collective funding models and schemes. By collective funding, I mean the different ways that library memberships exist for publishers so that authors are able to publish open access without having to directly pay the costs of the book themselves. So instead of the author or their institution paying per title, a large number of libraries are giving money to the publisher in order to cover a lot of titles at once. So this is a much more equitable way of open access because all authors can participate whether or not they have $15,000 lying around. And these sorts of schemes for books sprang up very early and in very large numbers, which is the list I have here on the left. This is a list of different collective funding initiatives for books specifically. It began very early with Knowledge Unlatched, which was really the first to do this kind of scheme. They set up a library membership scheme where libraries would give Knowledge Unlatched money, would create a pool of grants. Publishers could then apply for the grants to cover their book costs. But very soon afterwards, this expanded. Open book publishers, who I already mentioned, set up their own library membership scheme, which has been highly successful to this day. It's still ongoing. Lever Press and Puncton Books both set up quite soon afterwards. And since that time, MIT, JSTOR, Taylor & Francis, Bloomsbury, De Gruyter have all gotten into collective funding, either for themselves or for the publishers they represent. We today are representing two more set up by COPIM, which are Opening the Future and the Open Book Collective. And MIT this year, in fact, just last month, have started expanding their own program so that they're now providing a similar service to Duke University Press and Goldsmiths. So over to Kevin, what I would like to emphasize is that funding books without charging the authors is eminently possible. It is done, and it has been done for nearly 15 years now. Some publishers, particularly open book publishers, have been doing this for over 10 years and have just sort of gone from strength to strength and grown. So yes, funding open access books is a struggle, and there are some questions still about long-term sustainability that are still being determined and debated. I think it would be wrong to say that it doesn't fundamentally work, this kind of collective funding. We have a huge amount of evidence that it does. We have so many publishers here who participate in this, and also hundreds of libraries who, across all these different schemes, fund them. There are so many stakeholders who are willing to engage with all of this for a more equitable publishing ecosystem. And a more equitable publishing ecosystem is something that COPIM is also heavily involved in. And I will now turn over to Kevin to talk about that.
Thank you very much, Kira, for that very useful contextual information that really helps us to articulate and understand, hopefully, what I will try and carry on talking about now in the real meat of today's session on open access books. So as Kira has mentioned, the COPIM project, which ran from 2019 to 2023, was a research-funded project by Research England, funder obviously in the UK, and Arcadia, a US funder of open access. And what that project was really doing was developing community-led open publishing infrastructures for monographs. It was an international partnership building open community-owned systems and infrastructures to support open access book publishing. The project team, it was very important to note, includes libraries, open access book publishers, scholars, and infrastructure providers. The whole nature of what COPIM was attempting to rationalize throughout that research project was bringing the different aspects of the broad community in book production and book dissemination together to work on solutions to which open publishers were finding that they were hitting in their operations. So Copium was a very successful project in those initial 3 years. So successful, in fact, that at the end, it was fortunate to receive follow-on funding, which enabled these fledgling infrastructures that had been developed to operationalize as part of the Copium Open Book Futures project, which is currently in operation. So the project that we're currently working on is funded from 2023 to 2026. And we're doing an awful lot of work in the Open Book Futures project. These include things that are not illustrated on this slide here. We're looking at things such as digital preservation. We're looking at things such as accessibility. And we're also looking at things such as experimental digital book publishing. But as Kira notes, the real things that we're going to be talking about today are the Open Book Collective and Opening the Future, which are collective funding initiatives in different formats, really trying to make sure that we can offer a variety of routes for books to be made open in a most equitable and fair, sustainable way that can be bibliodiverse, by which we mean there can be different types of book published for different types of readers. Now, as Kira has articulated, one of the real key problems that Copium as a community is trying to address is the over-reliance on book processing charges for open access books. So on this slide, you can see quite an extensive case that we make regularly against book processing charges and how we should not be looking to implement them as the de facto mechanism to achieve open access books. On the first pillar, on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that we say that these book processing charges are frequently incredibly expensive. And as Kira has also referenced, this is prohibitively expensive in most cases. It's simply impossible for institutions or their libraries to fund all of the books that their institution would publish over the course of a year open access if we were looking to pay somewhere in the region of somewhere as low as $5,000 up to 14,000 or even over 20,000 US dollars, which are all real prices that have been made available for book processing for open access purposes. Coming into the center, we can see that not only are these costs prohibitively expensive, but they're also or embeds an even greater sense of inequality around access to publishing open access. The kind of researchers that are likely to have access to those sorts of funds for a book are likely to be those that have been successful in obtaining large research grants where such monies are made available for publishing a work open access. In creating a circumstance where only a small proportion of scholars could publish open access, we really embed that inequity that only the most elite scholars and the prestigious funded work is able to be made and disseminated openly. And that's a real challenge because we want open access to bring equity throughout a scholar's career and throughout the globe. So just limiting it to those sort of elite scholars seems highly problematic for Copium. We're also, in doing that, we're also making that opportunity to publish open access only available to scholars that are later in their academic career. When again, we want to be uplifting the marginalized scholars and early career researchers and giving them an opportunity to make their work the most impactful it can be by having it be visible and accessible to the greatest number of communities globally. And coming on to the final column on the right-hand side, we say that book processing charges are actually continuing a business model that exists within legacy publishing, and it lacks a substantive political change that we perceive open access to really have the opportunity to do. This is because really we're only changing the mechanisms of the transfer of money from institutions and libraries specifically to publishers, not the underlying structure of the model and what the costs actually cover as part of the payment. So these book processing charges aren't by any stretch of the imagination simply the cost of producing a book. There are a lot of other factors that go into formulating this book processing charge beyond the real cost. And that's why it's a price and not a cost. And that's something that we think is really unfair about book processing charges, as it does sustain this extraction from the higher education sector to private industry. And we think that's unfair for the realm of open access. And that's really where things start to go wrong in the realm of open access. On this slide, you can see a range of images that point to some of these economic challenges that we're really seeing in the sector. It's important to note that this increase of profit that you can see on the slide from earlier this year from the largest of the big five publishers, Elsevier, this increase in profit is occurring exactly during a time of global economic crisis for higher education and research, where library budgets are being challenged and often cut in real terms across the world. I'm speaking to librarians all over the globe, as I do on a daily basis as part of my work with the Open Book Collective. I'm not speaking in hyperbole when I say that this is a real threat to library budgets globally. Yet Elsevier and other commercial publishers continue to see an increase in profits from their operations. This seems disproportionate, and one has to reasonably ask how sustainable this is for libraries. How can libraries continue to provide or to continue to buy services and goods from organisations at increased costs whilst budgets are being cut internally? It creates real challenges. There's a range of graphs here, and I'm not going to go through them all in great detail because we want to try and get to the end and have a really interesting Q&A session. But at the bottom of the slide, you can see a comment from David Prosser, who's the Executive Director of Research Libraries UK. And really, he's seeing this in a similar way to how I think we at COPIM see it, that if we take this challenge of increasing extraction from commercial publishers, from an ever-decreasing pot of money for supporting research publication and dissemination, we could see it as an opportunity to change priorities for research work, for research publication, and for research dissemination. And that's where we think Diamond Open Access, particularly community-led Diamond Open Access, has a real opportunity to thrive in this challenging circumstance. To the next slide, please, Kira. And that very context really reminded me of the work of a scholar that I really admire, a scholar of library and information science that I used to cite frequently back when I was a student many years ago. And this was Budd, who noted that libraries do not simply respond passively to communities' stated desires. Libraries help to construct the desires and expectations of their communities. In other words, libraries, to an extent, contribute to the legitimacy of a cultural orthodoxy. Now, granted, that might seem rather lofty and away from the operations of libraries, but if we really look at the core of what Budd is saying there, way preceding the context of community-led Diamond Open Access, Budd's encouraging us as librarians to think about what we do in our library services, what we fund, what services we offer, and who we offer them to, because that delivery of those services reflects what we perceive our user base to need. But if we engage in a dialogue with our users, we can contribute more effectively to a circumstance that we could all mutually benefit from. And that gives libraries a great power and opportunity to help develop their institutions, to help develop their services, to help develop their research cultures in a way that can afford academics a more equitable route to publishing that values their research and any assessment of their research on the terms of the research itself, not how it happens to be packaged up and branded, which is too commonly the case, certainly in the UK and North America. But from conversations with the Board of Stewards at the Open Book Collective, one of our Board of Stewards members is Reggie Raju from University of Cape Town Libraries as an OA expert, and they frequently tell us that African scholarship is hugely marginalized, and African scholars are encouraged to publish in more respected, westernized traditions of scholarly publishing. And that continues to delegitimize grassroots African publishing opportunities that are being created locally. So why shouldn't libraries actually be trying to challenge this misplaced assumption that the title of the publisher or the brand of the particular imprint of a publisher is of inherent value, rather than valuing the quality of the research itself. And that's something that, as in open access book publishing, we do an awful lot of work to validate. That's why we have things like the PRISM attribute for peer review display, which is part of the open infrastructure, which Kira mentioned earlier, amongst a whole range of other things that I don't have the time to talk through today. So yeah, I really want to say that libraries, I think, have a really key part to play in this particular change from supporting commercial and legacy publishing to supporting community-led diamond open access more equitably for the benefit of their institution. Thank you, Kira. Now, as Kira has gone through in some detail earlier, community-led diamond open access is not the first migration towards open access we've seen over the course of the last 20 years or so since the Budapest Open Access Initiative in 2002. One of the market-led interventions that commercial presses brilliantly introduced was a thing called transitional agreements. These transitional agreements were a form of deal that incorporated read access, which libraries traditionally pay for digital access to content in the form of books, in the form of journals, and any other media that publishers offer. It also incorporated right access to those deals. So authors would be able to publish without paying an article processing charge, or on some occasions a book processing charge, by virtue of their institutional affiliation or partnership in these transitional agreements. However, all is not as well as it seems with this rather genius model. In fact, JISC, the Joint Information Systems Committee in the UK, which is a sort of quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisation that sort of mediates between libraries and commercial publishers in the UK, JISC commissioned a very extensive report last year in 2004. And as you can see on this quote on screen, based on the journal flipping rates observed between 2018 and 2022 in these transitional agreements, it would take at least 70 years for the big 5 publishers who produced the vast majority of journal titles. It would take at least 70 years for those publishers to flip their transitional agreement open access to fully open access titles. 70 years. An open access mechanism that takes 70 years is clearly not a viable or sustainable route, because over the course of 70 years, think about what has changed in scholarly publishing. Digital has been invented. So we can't really, envisage a situation where we're actually expected to wait for 70 years for open access to be delivered by these commercial publishers. And I think that really points to a subtle but significant challenge. That's where commercial publishers don't necessarily have an investment in open access, and these community-led open access publishers do. Thank you, Kira. So briefly then on to the Open Book Collective and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do things as a community. What we try to do is make it easier for libraries to subscribe to these emerging open access membership schemes. So we bring together an increasingly broad range of open access publishers that are committed to publishing open access books. We support a model of book publishing that helps publishers to reduce their reliance on book processing charges. The whole point is that by doing this, by becoming a member of the Open Book Collective, and by libraries supporting them at a relatively affordable and relatively low cost annually, it means that they can publish all of their books without any book processing charges over time as funds accrue to them. So we think this model is something that's highly sustainable and really stands on the shoulders of giants and develops from what Kira was describing around publishers such as Open Book Publishers and Punctum Books. We generate sustainable streams of revenue for open access publishers and service providers. So infrastructure is another key attribute that Open Book Collective supports. And this builds a community of librarians, publishers, and service providers all in the room together. And the reason that we do all of this is because of our ethos, which is founded on open infrastructure. So all of the software and code that we develop is released open source, so anybody could make use of it. Open Book Collective is a charity, so we're governed by the Charity Commission in the UK. We are not for profit. We do not develop a surplus. We simply pay for the cost of running the Open Book Collective as a charity, although we do have a charitable development fund, which I will talk about in the Q&A, hopefully. We're community-led and we support this concept of bibliodiversity. So we want to encourage different types of publishers to join and different types of institutions. And that's why we've recently onboarded our first non-English language publisher to the Open Book Collective. Thank you, Kira. I'll skip through this slide because I don't think I have particular time, but this is a slide that you'll be able to see when the slides are disseminated, just explaining the kind of operational mechanism of how Open Book Collective disseminates revenues received from libraries to publishers. And coming on to the next slide, you can see the governance structure. So this slide is actually very, very simple when you get your head around it. Having said that, it probably took me about 6 months to get my head around it, so I would understand why people see it as confusing. But what this slide really articulates is that any library community that has an active participation, so supports any, whether it's a single book publisher or a single infrastructure provider that is a member of the OBC, or whether it's the full package, they become a custodian of the Open Book Collective. And in being a custodian, they get a vote on who becomes the board members for the Open Book Collective. They can elect members and they can diselect members. In doing this, it means that anybody who participates in Open Book Collective, whether they're a publisher, an infrastructure provider, or a library supporter, co-govern the Open Book Collective. You choose the path of direction that we follow, and we as the management team work on day to day. And that means that it's not governed by an external agent who tells the community of supporters and publishers and infrastructures how the Open Book Collective is going to operationalize. The power lies with those with investment in the OBC in terms of time, economics, and resources. Thank you, Kira. And it's going rather well. So we formally launched in 2022, but really it's only in 2023, particularly late 2023, that OBC has been operational. And in that time, we've already received committed funds of just shy of £1 million, which is phenomenal success, given that we're offering this relatively low-cost option to support Diamond Open Access at scale across a range of publishers and infrastructures. I mentioned earlier that we're currently part of the COPIM project, which is funded until 2026. But after 2026, it's really key that we can be financially sustainable independently of research investment, funding investment. And we commissioned an external report, and it's great to receive the news that we're well on track to be financially independent from the end of the research project in April 2026. So we're showing that we can derive enough revenue to make ourselves work, make the model pay for itself and its ongoing operation. We have increased our numbers of publishers and service providers dramatically over the course of the last few years. We launched with initially 6 members, and now in the intervening period, we have onboarded 17 publishers and service providers. And we've grown our support to over 85 supporters globally. So over 85 individual libraries are committing funds to the Open Book Collective for specifically producing Diamond Open Access books through open access publishers that have a commitment to community-led open access publishing. And there's a figure at the bottom there, which is obviously a fake, that's from 2024, where because of the number of open access publishers that we're onboarding, the number of open access books being made available through Open Access Collective's publisher members is increasing exponentially. All of those works are openly available to everybody globally anyway, so it's kind of independent of the funding that they receive from OBC. But by more publishers joining, it gives kind of greater impetus for libraries to support this growing initiative. And we're starting to see a real tipping point where community-led Diamond Open Access is almost becoming a default option for some scholars in some contexts. And that's really, really successful for the Open Book Collective. And I spent far too long going through those slides. I do apologise. And I'll just pass over to Kira for the last few.
Yeah, I'm just going to very, very briefly talk about how Opening the Future works. It's it's the other COPIM funding infrastructure, the one that I work on. It's in principle quite similar in that libraries buy a backlist package from a participating publisher. So this is something the library is very used to doing. They're buying books. But the publisher uses the revenue from these particular packages that Opening the Future has set up just to fund Diamond Open Access titles. So it's using backlist to fund Open Access Frontlist. We call it Backlist to the Future. I still think we should have gone with that as a name. It was quite funny, but we didn't want to get sued by a film studio. It has, from a library perspective, an extremely, a very, very simple structure. They pay a membership fee, they're invoiced by a trusted third party, such as Lyrasis in the US or JISC in the UK. They then get concurrent DRM-free access to backlist packages that they own after a 3-year subscription. They get access to all the expected metadata. And not only have they bought some books, but they have funded new frontlist OA titles that they will also receive, you know, as libraries, because they're open access titles. There are, so I think in the interest of time, I might largely skate over this, but we are aware that there are many ongoing challenges in this financial climate for everyone for open access. There are tighter budgets for libraries. It becomes harder to justify expenditure. There are anxieties for the publishers. What if they get fewer members than they anticipated? How can you convince libraries to renew their support? They might sign up the first year because it's a shiny, exciting new project. And then when it gets to renewal, go, well, we might try something else. And another big problem is, as more and more people get into collective funding, the libraries are overwhelmed. They're being asked for money, you know, maybe once a month from someone else who has a different offering. But these are things that we deal with every day, and we have done for quite a long time now. And there are mitigations. For example, having very transparent and good communication with the library, so they can be quite clear on any price rises, why they're happening. They know that they're not sort of being robbed blind. It also just really helps to be able to have an open dialogue with them about maybe why they should renew, even though times are difficult, or sometimes just to have a discussion with them where they say, yeah, we can't do it this year, sorry, but we should be able to next time. We also try and make these things as low risk as possible for the publisher, so they haven't really committed overly to this compared to other revenue streams, so that if there is a bad year, they can pull back and rely on other things. And we also try to make things as frictionless as possible. And as collective models proliferate, infrastructure such as the Open Book Collective, which can sort of it creates an accessible point for multiple different publishers. This is very appealing to the libraries. So yes, there are challenges, but there are mitigations. And despite the very difficult financial climate, we continue to get very good renewal rates from libraries. And just to properly finish off before the Q&A, I just wanted to come back again slightly to open infrastructure. Because obviously we've been talking about open access books. That's what we're here to talk about today. But open infrastructure is just as vital in our minds as open access books. It's not just about the actual titles coming out openly. It's about the infrastructure through which this is achieved. And so I guess what is open infrastructure? You can define it as a shared research infrastructure to support open science and all its stakeholders, which is a definition that I've borrowed from Invest in Open Infrastructure, which is a very important umbrella group around open infrastructure. Infrastructures that we talk about are generally digital, so they're publication platforms, repositories, research information systems, and many others. They're open source. For example, as Kevin mentioned, the OBC software is open source. And they should also be, where possible, interoperable. These kinds of infrastructures empower all stakeholders, sort of publishers, libraries, authors. It allows them to engage in open access confidently, knowing that they can use and adapt infrastructures in perpetuity, and that these will work well with other key open access infrastructures. This is obviously something that COFM has been very closely involved in. On the left, we have a poster from a recent conference. It points to the core values that we see open infrastructure providing, as well as open access providing. So there's interconnectivity, obviously, because they are interoperable platforms, so they allow different stakeholders to connect to one another in a frictionless way. These also support bibliodiversity because there is less of a barrier to entry. You don't have to spend £5,000 on a management system because there are open source versions that work very well. They generally have transparent governance in the way that the OBC does. They obviously support openness for reasons I don't need to explain. And similarly, equity, because of this low barrier to participation and the ease of interoperation and in turn trust. And I just also wanted to put in the poster on the right. This poster was done by Tote Open Metadata. It's another part of COPIM. They're an open metadata system. And I just like it because it sort of zooms out from what we're talking about. Like, we're talking about the COPIM project, we're talking about our very specific projects. But the whole point of open infrastructure is that it allows so many different stakeholders to engage together. For example, here we have at the center, we have Tote, obviously, but we have all the publishers that use them. We have the integration with PKP. We have all the aggregators that it pushes out to, such as JSTOR and EBSCO and OAPN that I already mentioned. And we really wanted to emphasize that there is sort of a very strong underlying network of open infrastructure, which is just as vital to all of this as the fact that open access titles come out. And this broad range of infrastructures is growing all the time, and it should be there to support publishers and authors and libraries and readers for a long time to come. And so with that, we would like to say thank you very much for your attention, and we would really love to have a dialogue about your interest in books. We have ourselves some questions for you guys that I will put in the chat once I stop sharing. It would be great to hear some answers now, but also we always like to hear from people, so please reach out. I forgot to add Kevin's email address, only mine is on here. But yeah, we would just really like to hear your perspective as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kira. Thank you so much, Kira and Kevin, for such a very insightful session. And I can see that people are really, really interacting on our chat section. And we have received one question so far into the Q&A box. And please let me remind everybody, please, if you have any questions regarding the content, regarding the session, please feel free to drop it by the Q&A section, the Q&A box. You will find it below the screen. Just make sure not to put it within the chat in order not to get lost. The question here, Kira, is Open Book Collective involves foraying libraries?
So non-UK libraries, I guess.
Yes, Open Collective is a global partnership between libraries and publishers. So it's region agnostic, and we're very much looking to work with the broadest range of communities that we can. So we have supporters from around the globe. On most continents, we have support and/or publishers participating in the Open Book Collective. And we're really looking to grow and expand that community and work with that community in different ways to support libraries on one hand, to support publishers on the other, and to bring that community together to ultimately support one another and create more equitable opportunities for open access publishing.
Thank you. So this was the questions that we have received to our Q&A box. So dear our attendees, we have Kira and Kevin, they have sent us some questions that we have added to our chat box. Feel free if you would like to reply to our chat, or if you would like to come with us here. We still have a few minutes that we can spare for you to respond.
Just in the absence of any questions, and feel free, as Kira said, to contact us after the session via email. We can arrange chats, a video call if that suits you, or we can do it by communicate via email. But in the absence of that, what the Open Book Collective and Open in the Future are looking to do is work with this very diverse community. And we're really curious, around the context in North Africa and Middle East, around your publishing cultures. We do have contacts and we do communicate with them, but of course it's a diverse community in and of itself. So as a sort of an opening question, what is your experience open access publishing? Is it something that scholars are drawn towards and see the benefits of, or is it something that people are nervous about, or perhaps have some apprehensions, or perhaps there's pressure to publish in other ways?
Thank you, Kevin. We have received few questions now. First one is it possible to publish journal articles and or thesis in open access freely without any charge?
It absolutely is. Sorry for jumping in on this one, Kira.
No, please do.
Yes, so that's through what we call Diamond Open Access, which is very much what we support for books. We have obviously many publishers publish both journals and books. And we work with, in the Open Book Collective, publishers who do that. The first one that comes to mind is LSE Press, for example, London School of Economics Press. They're a Diamond Open Access publisher. That means they don't charge fees for articles or for books. And that's the method that is common. That's the sort of title that's given to that method of publishing without charges. What we're doing, though, as community-led infrastructures, is trying to provide resources to make sure that ethos can work. Because, of course, just because you're not charging doesn't mean you don't have overheads and fees, in your production of journal articles and books. So we're trying to offer a relatively low fee that libraries can pay that can then provide revenue streams to make those journals and those books publish without requiring APCs, article processing charges, or book processing charges for books. And incidentally, there's a new upstart that's closely related to the Open Book Collective called the Open Journals Collective. Is being set up by Caroline Edwards from the Open Library of Humanities, and they're looking to do quite a similar thing to what Open Book Collective does for Diamond Open Access journals.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And also to our attendees, I would like to let you know that Kira has left us their emails, Kira's email and Kevin's email in our chat box. Feel free to save these emails, and I'm sure they will be more than happy and glad to respond back to any questions. And since we are about to run out of time, I will conclude our Q&A discussion with a question from Shafika Salman. What strategies do you recommend to improve equitable access to academic book, particularly for underserved communities?
That's a great question. And as a librarian, it's one that I faced in practice very frequently in terms of both supporting researchers who want to disseminate their work as openly as possible and in supporting researchers and students who want to access information, but we don't necessarily have a subscription to it. The real answer is staring us as in the face, but it's a real culture change to try and make that actionable. And that's seeing and supporting open access works, emphasizing it in our outreach when we're talking to students, when we're doing information literacy sessions as librarians, and when we're talking to researchers around publication methods, emphasizing the opportunities that open access brings. Materially, that's things such as increased citations, which Kira's mentioned. Materially, as also Kira's mentioned, that's a global uptick in accessibility. So you will see regions that historically have been paywalled out of accessing works, not only having access, but actually using that work. And you can track, and you can also track its citations from that globally. So it's really emphasizing the value of open and, fostering a culture that supports it rather than sees it as a threat. Then you get into all kinds of other more complicated institutional questions around rewarding and recognizing participation in open for scholars. And that is a separate challenge, but one which we all face at some point. And that's a longer conversation that I'd be very happy to have with anybody if they wish to do so.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you so much for responding to these questions. And I'm surprised that we still have more and more questions coming, but we unfortunately are running out of time. So to everybody who has their questions not answered, I would please ask you to email Kira and Kevin so that you can get all the answers you are waiting for or you're looking for. And I would like to thank you again, Kira and Kevin, for this insightful session. And I would like to thank every single person who attended our session today. Before we just conclude, I would like to ask you to complete this survey I mean, you have the QR code on our screen now. Please scan it and complete the survey to help us improve your experience. And by this, I mean that your response to our survey is the key to us to let us know what's missing in our region, what's needed, and so that we can work on providing more and more events like this, more and more insightful sessions. And this will be the way to us to know what's needed. So please, it will not be taking more than 2 or 3 minutes of your time, but it will be really, really valued. So please feel free to scan the QR code and respond to it. Next slide, please, Mira. And I can tell that I have noticed one of our attendees today is asking to join us, and this is the answer. If you would like to join our initiative, if you'd like to join forum membership, all what you need to do is just to scan this QR code and know that our membership is institutional, and you are more than welcome. And we will make sure that the onboarding will be moving smoothly and everything will be easy and clear. It's free of a charge, it's organizational, and your input and joining us will help us moving towards more open and knowledgeable world. Next slide, please, Mira. And you can also register for our next upcoming community development activities. We have this one is for July, and we have the Forum for Open Research in MENA, the conference, which will be taking place in October. And you can visit our website always to check more and more events and register. Next slide, please. And finally, thank you so much for every single person who attended with us today. Thank you, Kira and Kevin, and thank you so much, Mira. Mira is the unknown soldier for every event. So thank you, and we are looking forward to seeing you in our upcoming activities. I hope you have a nice time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kevin and Kira.
Thank you for
Not at
inviting
all.
us.
Thank you very much.
Right. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.